Major underwriting for A Taste of Louisiana with Chef John Folse was provided by the Baton Rouge Convention and Visitors Bureau. In Baton Rouge, our past is your present. Baton Rouge, authentic Louisiana at every turn. And People's Drugstores, serving South Louisiana for generations. George and Shirley Piku are proud supporters of A Taste of Louisiana with Chef John Folse. And by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting. Our mission is to tell Louisiana's story to the world. And by the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism.
Where you have this architecture, history, music.
And the bittersweet cry of the blues.
Especially the blues.
There you go.
How about a dozen?
Red beans and rice.
We rolling, y'all.
We're a nation of immigrants, a country with roots in other soils. Nowhere is that more true than in the country of Louisiana. I'm Chef John Folse, inviting you to tune in to A Taste of Louisiana and a new series dedicated to our food heritage. Louisianians are descendants of 7 primary nations that have influenced every dish we cook today. Welcome to A Taste of Louisiana. All right. Hey, how y'all doing? Nice to have y'all on the set. You got the best seat in the house here, huh? Hey, Hazel, how you doing, baby? Nice to have you with us today. Hey, girl, how y'all doing? Good to see you. Good to see y'all. Hey. Nice to see you, Paul. Thanks so much for being in. Oh, I tell you, welcome so much, y'all, in my studio kitchen, or I should say my home kitchen, even though, hey, you know we're right here in our wonderful spot where I love to fire up all these great ranges and start cooking. And do we have some wonderful dishes today, dishes of our Native Americans. It's going to be a great show, and I'm so happy to have you here in the audience with us. So, hey, thank y'all so much. Huh? Good. Y'all, Louisiana's story begins with the Native Americans and Christopher Columbus's discovery of the New World in 1492. The discovery ignited tremendous interest among the European nations and explorers headed to the New World. They just came in droves. What these explorers found were Native Americans living along the blufflands of the Mississippi River, the swamps and bayous, and the coastal waterways. These explorers documented and described the Native American nations that comprised Louisiana in the 1700s. In these early days before farming, the Native Americans hunted and fished for food. With Louisiana's 3 great growing seasons and a fabulous outdoor pantry, they rarely lacked for anything. David Griffing, a Louisiana park ranger and a Native American expert, shared his thoughts with us about our first Americans. Louisiana is known internationally as Sportsman's Paradise, a land teeming with wild game, birds, and fish. Without a doubt, our first inhabitants, the Native Americans, were fabulous hunters and fishermen. The Attakapaw, Caddo, Tunica, Natchez, Houma, Choctaw, and Chettamacha tribes were first described by European explorers such as Tonti, Marquette, and Joliet.
The Native Americans were conservationists. What we're finding is that they did take what they needed from the landscape. We're finding what appears to us no waste. Fishing what they needed, hunting white-tailed deer, and bringing in the plant foods that they would need at the time. They didn't have ways of storage, mainly most of the foods that they brought in, so you can imagine they would have just gotten, from the landscape what they needed to live.
Deer were tracked, killed from stands. Hunters even slept in the deer's bed while it fed and killed it upon its return. Some tribes wore deer skins over their shoulders to approach the animals. Communal hunts were conducted where hunters formed a crescent surrounding the deer, driving it from side to side until it fell in exhaustion.
Really, when you look at the complete use of the animal, they were using just about every part. Of course, the meat for food, you would have had the bone for tools. We've even found on site socketed deer antler spear points, split long bones of the white-tailed deer for bone awls and needles. We're finding that these people wasted very little of the animal itself. Bone, antler, the hides would have been used for clothing, for covers. for shoes, for pouches, you know, so we're looking at, you know, every part of the animal, undoubtedly. None of it was wasted.
Other wild game enjoyed in the Native American diet included raccoons, rabbits, and otters. These animals were caught using a variety of hunting techniques, including nets, snares, and darts. Sharpened poles were used to hunt alligators.
In the later cultures, starting about 500 AD, they would have used the bow and arrow. But before 500 AD, they used a throwing stick known as the atlatl, a spear thrower, a spear throwing device for hunting larger game like white-tailed deer and bear, animals like that. Probably every cultural period for 10,000 years on this Mason Ridge area had hunting camps. You had to get away from the village to hunt your deer and a lot of your wild animals. They're not going to hang around the village areas, you know, an active area. So I think everywhere from Paleo-Indian period for over 10,000 years ago all the way to historic contact times, you're looking at hunting camps, because we do find them scattered all over this area, in the Mason Ridge area.
The Native Americans also consumed muskrats, beetles, locusts, and lizards, as well as a variety of waterfowl.
And some of the game birds that the people would have actually pursued would have been anything from waterfowl, ducks, geese, herons. We found pelican remains in prehistoric context.
Fish and shellfish were abundant. Shallow coastal waters and bays provided drum, croaker, speckled trout, redfish, flounder, and mullet. Fish were caught with hooks, trout lines, and weirs.
Fishing varied greatly. If you're along a nice, large, rushing river, we're finding fish traps, fish weirs, where they would drive the fish actually up into these funneled traps and then skewer them, entrap them, net them. We're finding where loads of fish were brought in that way. The Poverty Point people used nets weighted with what we call plummets today, which would have been a type of fishing net weight made of iron ore, hematite, magnetite. And they were actually netting the fish. Now, if you look at some archaic cultures, you'll find bone fish hooks, where they were actually angling for single fish.
Oysters were abundant in the waters next to Lake Pontchartrain. The Natchez Indians traveled to the mouth of the Mississippi to gather oysters, which were then preserved by smoking. They also ate brackish water clams and mussels.
The coastal Native American groups were using a lot of the oysters and the shellfish from the Gulf coastal regions, and we're finding shell heaps, sometimes several feet high, where just generation after generation just accumulated those, of eating those oysters and other shellfish like that.
Our native Louisianians hunted not only for sport as we do today, but out of necessity.
Now, the various plants used probably for different purposes, for food, medicinal use, just to name a few. We have found remains of wild plum. We have found remains of shell fragments from hickory nut, walnut, pecan, acorns. All of that would have been for food. Persimmon seeds have been found. We also found evidences of lotus roots actually being used in the cooking pits. A recent experiment with some of the cooking objects shows a lot of evidence of cooking those in those pits. Medicinal purposes, we find in Native American lore toothache trees, headache trees, where they would take the inner bark and sometimes the leaves from certain types of trees for medicines.
Louisiana provided our first Americans with a bountiful harvest upon which they lived. Because of their great respect for the animal and its environment, Louisiana is still known today as Sportsman's Paradise. Y'all, what a fantastic insight into our Native Americans and their contribution to the early colonists. They were so generous with their knowledge. They were so generous with the sharing of their spices from the swamp floor pantry, the harvesting techniques for our game. You can only imagine that without them, I doubt that the colonists would have survived. And you know, even at the first Thanksgiving outside of Louisiana, many, many years before, there was journals written about just the communion that the Native Americans had with nature. And one of the early governors mentioned in his writings that the deer, the Indians begged them not to cook the deer at the same time as the turkey, because they needed to pay homage to these two animals separately, because they had given their life for the community. And I think when we think of no waste and everything being used up, we're going to see a little bit about that in this in the show today. I decided to do one of the key dishes of the early Native Americans, and it is, as you see me putting it together, it's kind of the origin of our vegetable soup. And it seems that every one of the Native Americans had a dish very similar to this, because they paid such homage to corn. It was one of the great gifts from the Creator, as they thought about it. Corn, beans, squash, it should be on every table. And as long as the Native Americans had beans, corn, squash, that they would need for nothing. They would have clothing, they would have houses, they would have certainly sustenance. So this great dish typifies that thought of the Native Americans. What meats would they have used? Well, they had a lot from the pantry. First of all, I want you to look at this. This is a piece of bison. This is a nice bison tenderloin. You can see how lean it is. And bison was, roaming the plains of Louisiana, so many at the time of colonization you couldn't even imagine. So bison would have been a great choice. Venison. A nice venison roast, but again, remember, there was no refrigeration, so to not be able to use the whole animal up in some way, they wouldn't have wasted it, so they'd have been very cautious about what to use. So today, I'm going to use bison, and I've actually taken the bison and I've cubed it into like 1-inch cubes, kind of like beef stew, and I have it over here in the pot already simmering on a way. I want you to take a look at this, because bison, you might not realize this, but it's a little tougher than filet mignon. Yeah, just like, it's a little bit tougher than filet mignon. And in fact, even the filet mignon of bison takes about 2.5 hours to cook, to tenderize. So what the Native Americans would do prior to cast iron, they would actually boil the meat in a bear skin or deer skin bag with reflective heat off of the fire, heat the water up, or even some hot rock cooking where they would heat the rocks in the fire and then drop it into the deer skin bag with the meat and keep it going that way literally for hours to tenderize it. And I would suspect that they didn't really need their meat quite as tender as we're used to today with all of the marbling. So I have the meat. Hazel, I need a little stirring. You know, I'm kind of, there you go, give me a minute. There you go. You can stir too with that camera. Come on, Keith. Look, Keith is my sous chef up here. He can kind of stir with that camera a little bit. Anyway, this, and you know what, boiling this meat for this long gives a wonderful, nice and flavorful stock. You see it right here. So I've taken the bones, and I've actually taken the bones of the venison and of course the bison, and I've cooked it in this stock with onions to create great flavor. So y'all, this is just kind of cooking away right here. I'm going to let this cook for just a minute. I want to come over here and talk to Janie Luster just a little bit about some of the things, because I saw this and I was just absolutely fascinated. I want you to get a good shot of this. Now, I know there's a lot of something good behind this, but I tell you what, if I'd have seen it, I wouldn't be here if somebody had walked up to my window at night. Hey, tell me about this, Janie. Welcome, first of all.
Thank you.
Tell me about this wonderful mask.
Well, my brother, Kirby Verrett, his wife, Zoanna, her dad, Mr. Antoine Billiard, was a mask maker. And again, like you were saying, we did not waste anything.
Right.
You know, we ate the meat and made masses out of the turtle shell.
Now, you were telling me that there's the moons are actually represented on here, right?
Yes.
Because of the growing seasons?
We have, you know, today we have the calendar with the 12 month. Well,
right.
Indian people, even today, still use the moon, and there were 13
right.
moons that we did everything by. And there's 13 large squares on every turtle shell. I've never seen one with more or less, always 13, representing those 13 moons. And the little squares around it represent
right here, all
right
around.
There.
Is
the days.
Is the days. Now, you also do basket making, and you've been awarded great awards with the basket, right?
Yes. The Houma Indians, this basket right here is called the Houma Half-Hitch Call Basket. We were the only tribe in the whole country to make this kind of basket. And it's made out of palmetto, you know, unique to this area.
Well, I'll tell you what, everybody's seen the palmetto. You just keep doing it, because I understand you're making 2 of these for me to take home with, so you just keep doing it. Okay, y'all, Jade here. So y'all, once again, you see use of everything. Now we have the hearth pony. It's the meat is tender. Now look what goes into it here. Very simply, this is just a dump and boil dish. So we're gonna have tomatoes, we have carrots, we have corn, we have beans, we have lima beans, we have sweet potatoes, and of course all of this goes right down into the pot. And salt would have been a really great condiment here. So I'm going to put all of this into here, and we're just going to let this simmer for probably about 45 minutes. Look how colorful that pot becomes right here, y'all. Really, really nice and colorful here. Gorgeous. Look, isn't that beautiful? Take a look down in there, Keith. Really good. Get way down in that pot, huh? See that? Now, of course, these are going to cook very, very quickly here. We're going to just let this go, and then I can add a little salt to it, which I'll put right now into it, and we'll just kind of season it up. A little pepper, they would have used pepperworth or one of the spices. And that's about it. Now, of course, when it's done, take a look at my little casserole dish here, because the little casserole is, this is the way it would be served. I would just take a nice ladle of it like this and put it right down into the bowl and serve it. And of course, you know, later on, we saw things like noodles go into it or things like that. A lot of things went into the dish to kind of beef it up a little bit, but a very simple, you can see the origin of vegetable soup in that dish. Now, y'all, I've known Bertney Langley of the Coushatta Nation for many years now, and recently I had the privilege of meeting his mother. She was absolutely great, and she gave me a lesson in traditional fry bread making. Okay, I'm sitting here in Elton, Louisiana, off of Old Highway 190 in Louisiana, and I'm here with Bertney Langley and his mom, members of the Coushatta Nation, and I'm getting a lesson in true old world native fry bread. And Bertney, thanks so much for hosting me on the lake today. Huh?
Yeah, thanks for coming.
And your mother, you might want to introduce.
This is my mother, Loris Langley.
And I'm really surprised at how tender this dough is. Now, how far back does the fry bread go in the Indian nations?
I'm not even sure, but as long as I can remember, we've always had fry bread. But if you go visit other Indian nations, they all have fry bread, so it must be in our culture, you know, a little while back.
And probably made with corn first.
Yes.
Now, how long has your mom been making fry bread?
Oh, she tells me about 50 years, but I think she's making it longer than that. She's 77 years old. So.
Okay, now I have here about 3 cups of just all-purpose flour, and why don't you ask her how much of this to put in, the baking powder?
That's good. That's good.
Okay, and salt?
All right, that's all right.
Okay, now I mix this really, really well, just kind of mix it together. And this is the tricky part, because I'm going to put some warm water, about 1 ladle, and kind of mix it around to get where we think the dough needs to be nice and tender here, because this is the tricky part. If you put too much water, it's too liquidy.
Yeah,
if you
too
put
soupy, yeah.
It's too dry.
You have to get your hands.
She told me I had to get my hands down in here, right, huh?
Now just roll it.
Just roll it like this. Yeah. Now she's fried a bunch of it. Now you like to make tacos out of it. Why don't you show me how you make one? Look, I have a little platter right there. I have a little plate. Why don't you show me quickly how you put one together?
Okay.
Okay, so that's a meat filling, and you just put the meat in, and then you would top it with all of the normal taco fillings. And this is typical of this area, or?
No, we just kind of picked it up from other folks that were doing this. We'd find different ways of cooking fry bread.
Well, you see all the flour on my hand here, huh? And it tells you. Okay, a little tomato onto it, a little chopped onion, and then of course you could use powdered sugar for breakfast. As you say, you could dip it in gumbo,
cheese. Plus here's the picante sauce.
Oh, a little picante sauce, nice. And well, Bertney, thank you so much for having me out on the lake, and your mom, she's done a wonderful job. And look, I'm going to try to do better next time. Thank you all so much. Woo! All right. Y'all, I I had to get all of that dough off of my hands. It's still sticking on here. What a great lesson in fry bread from Bertney Langley and his mom. Now, you know, again, I had trouble trying to decide my second dish for you because of so many choices with the Native Americans, but take a look at what I've decided on. I'm going to do boulettes, or balls of garfish. You could do it with redfish, you could do it with catfish. Take a look at the garfish, the alligator gar, one of the oldest fish in the Louisiana bayous, millions of years old, and the Native Americans loved it, and they also loved the catfish. But we're going to do the garfish, and when you look at the meat of the garfish tends to be very red, and it needs to be cooked for a long time because it's tough. The little young ones, of course, very tender, and everything used on the garfish, look at these fabulous scale brooches that's made by Janie over here. Janie, what a great job of this. This is absolutely beautiful. And the Native Americans would have done the same thing with those. So I've taken the meat and I've gone into a pot here because I wanted to boil it and again make a nice stock. And you can see how the meat, after a while, you still has a red tint to it, but it's very tender. I can push my finger right through it, and I need to make a little gravy for the boulettes. So I'll do that first. In my pot of dark brown roux, which is equal parts of oil and flour, and we're going to go ahead and get this cranked up a little bit. I'm going to add to that garlic. Now, Janie, you were mentioning, we were talking about how salt was given to us by the Native Americans. Tell me a little bit about that.
My mom told me that they would gather in May at the Gulf, go out there and bring their kettle and build a fire underneath the kettle and take the Gulf water, the salt water, and boil it and then gather the salt around it.
And just evaporate it right out of the pots, and then it would be, and today we pay $20 a pound for sea salt, and the Native Americans were doing it here. Most people don't realize that. All right, y'all, so I have the fish stock going into my roux. Look at the beautiful color here, and I'm gonna let this come to a nice simmer because this stock is fully flavored with the flavor of the garfish or the catfish, whatever you want to use. And I'm gonna, this is a stew, not a soup, so you want to make sure that you have, I know you're dying for a nice garfish ball. Huh? Oh, I know you are. Here, look, I can feel it. Okay, now, so the sauce is going pretty good here. Now, let's take a look at the fish. I've taken the fish and I've chopped it up in here. Well, I just ran it through one of these potato choppers. You know how to do that. I don't have to show you. And I have eggs, the white fish meat. Look how nice and tender that is. All the bell peppers, the celery, the onion. I need to throw some garlic in here. Don't you think we need garlic in there? Absolutely. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Why did everybody clap when people say garlic in the kitchen? Okay, now get your hands in it right here, y'all. Just kind of, I have eggs in there. I'm going to hold it all together nicely. Some of that good sea salt we were talking about a minute ago, we definitely want to get some of that in here. And we're going to make what's called boulettes, and boulettes in French, of course, meaning balls. You could also do hamburger patties, a good garfish hamburger on the grill. Oh, beautiful stuff, I'm telling you. Huh? Good stuff. Now I'm going to add the breadcrumbs, and you can, of course, the Native Americans would have used cornbread. They'd have cooked some cornbread and put in here, or cornmeal would have gone in. So I'm adding that, and that's going to hold it together. And then, of course, a little bit cayenne pepper, black pepper, all of those wonderful flavors. And this tends to be a little spicy, this one here. So you want to get it going, and then you just make it into balls. Just roll them just like you would a meatball, you know, same thing. So the balls go right down into it like that, and then of course you let this simmer for just, the meat's already cooked because I've poached it. I'm always wiping my hands when I'm cooking Native American food, from the fry breads to this. And then you just let it simmer in here. Add enough stock as you go to kind of thin it out. I'm going to continue with a little green onions and parsley. And let me show you what it looks like when it's done. Season it up nice and spicy. Take a look at it right here in this bowl. It's really beautiful here. Just kind of get it down in there. Look at the boulettes once they've cooked in the sauce. Oh, isn't that great? Serve it over rice. Now, what else would you see in a typical Native American kitchen with a dinner like this? Well, first of all, cornbread, naturally, some nice cornbread would go perfect with that. And of course, drying bison and drying venison over smoke wood and fire to create our modern day jerky. Just a wonderful dish. Hey, gifts of our Native Americans, just absolutely fantastic culture, and a culture that without them, we would not be here today. They taught us the ways of the bayous. Well, y'all, time flies when you're enjoying good food and good conversation with friends in the kitchen. Thanks for being here with us today, and be sure to join us next time for another Taste of Louisiana as we explore our great state's unique food heritage. None better. Y'all ready to eat? Are you ready to eat, honey? Woo! Thank y'all.
To purchase the Encyclopedia of Cajun and Creole Cuisine by Chef John Folse, featuring more than 750 traditional recipes, a CD-ROM of the book, or a copy of the program featuring all 3 episodes of Today's Culture, call the number on your screen. Major underwriting for A Taste of Louisiana with Chef John Folse was provided by the Baton Rouge Convention and Visitors Bureau. In Baton Rouge, our past is your present. Baton Rouge, authentic Louisiana at every turn. And People's Drug Stores, serving South Louisiana for generations. George and Shirley Picu are proud supporters of A Taste of Louisiana with Chef John Folse. And by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting. Our mission is to tell Louisiana's story to the world. And by the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism.
Where you have this architecture, history, music,
And the bittersweet cry of the blues.
especially the blues.
There you go.
How about a dozen?
Red beans and rice.
We rolling, y'all.